This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity Podcast. Here are 10 stories that we're following today, and a fascinating news day from at least my perspective. First, COVID hospitalization skyrocketed yesterday. Hospitalization reached 97,000 yesterday, up from 42,000 in early November. That gives you a sense of how much this has increased over the last couple of months. Just 2 months ago, we were at 42,000 hospitalizations, now at 97,000. Deaths rose to 2,400 yesterday. Case counts are through the roof. 95% of the cases are Omicron cases versus Delta or Alpha or other cases. To follow more on COVID-19 and COVID, read Becker's Healthcare, follow Becker's Healthcare. Second, a second fascinating story, Toyota outsold GM this past year, 2021, for the first time in U.S. history. In the U.S., 2.3 million vehicles, 2.2 million vehicles. Toyota creates great vehicles, great reliable vehicles. They and their line Lexus do that. This was more due, as much due to supply chain issues as anything else. Toyota managed the supply chain and the chip crisis better than almost any other car manufacturer, and thus that was a huge advance for them this past year. Third, the Dow was up yesterday, the S&P was flat, and the NASDAQ was down. Futures are flat today with the NASDAQ pointing down. As interest rates go up, the NASDAQ, the growth stocks with earnings far into the future, end up getting hurt further by the rates going up, and that's what you're seeing currently. Fourth story following is Treasury yield has risen almost 20 basis points in the last couple of weeks. It's back up to 1.67 or so to start today. The 52-week range, to give you a sense, is 1 to 1.765, so not too far off the 52-week high. The 2 years at 0.76, and that's worth noting because it started 2021 at 0.14, so a huge movement in the right direction in those yields. Fifth story, Bank of America. Bank of America rose nearly 4% yesterday. Big stocks tend to rise on rising yields because banks are going to start to make money again in the lending business. I'm pleased that I had put some money in Bank of America. The core of my investing is in index funds, SP and index funds, but I do explore a little bit some of these other things, some individual stocks, some other individual ETFs. And this is in contrast to my Bitcoin ETF, which is down 34% since I invested in it. But I'm happy to have some money in Bank of America. There is an article today, Bitcoin low valuations, price drops may be nearing an end. I've got a typo in my LinkedIn post on this. But like a true Cubs fan, I see any of these things as reason for optimism. So we'll hope that Bitcoin does bounce back. Sixth story we're following today is Brian Sosi, one of my favorite writers on LinkedIn. He's an editor at large and Yahoo Finance editor. Writes, the rally in Coca-Cola stock is just beginnings as an analyst, and let's hope that's the case. The seventh story, which I thought was fascinating, is about China and investing in China. Jeff Gundlach, and Jeff is known as sort of the bond king. He's sort of one of the most well-recognized bond investors of our time. Wrote an article and was featured on a interview saying China is uninvestable. And he basically said the conflicts of inflated growth, lack of data transparency, the China Evergrande situation, and what it reveals regarding artificial growth, and government control and arbitrary actions leads him to believe that can't invest in China, that just is uninvestable. It's just the data is so opaque, the government's so arbitrary that impossible to invest there. He mimics another theory put forth by Michael Lewis about companies borrowing so much money to inflate growth and having that at some point show up as not real growth, sort of like an emperor has no clothes type of thing. I'm a big fan of the Lewis thesis in his book Boomerang, where governments becoming hopelessly indebted, and Gundlach's theory on the need for data and transparency. Both of these folks are brilliant and worth thinking about. The eighth story we're following today is just really a talk yesterday. Had a great chance to visit on Becker's Healthcare podcast with Jody Rank of Chillmark Research and Sanjeev Agrawal, president and CEO of LeanToss. They talked about the tidal wave of growth in the AI for operations space in a recent report issued by Chillmark and LeanToss about AI for operations growth. LeanToss was named a top vendor in this area, flagship vendor by Chillmark, and just fascinated to see what they're doing there and what is going on in that space. Ninth, thrilled this past week to see the Becker's Healthcare podcast ranked in about 21st, 22nd in Apple's Business News rankings, sort of at the very top there. Really fantastic for a healthcare podcast. And then to see us pass 4.5 million downloads. A lot of help from Jeremy Core, a lot of support from Jessica Cole, Katie Atwood, Jim Milligan, and several more. Finally, thrilled to be introduced to a couple healthcare entrepreneurial technology investors and founders over the last couple of weeks, thanks to Fred Davis and Ed Marks. We separately did a podcast from the review of one of the business plans I recently did, about 6 thoughts on business plans, and feel free to listen to that at Vector Private Equity Podcast as well. I'm also thrilled this week to visit with brilliant investors Chris Engelman and Alan Cole. Always a pleasure to see what people are thinking and how they approach the market, and we'll talk about their core philosophies on investing. Thank you for listening to this version of the Vector Private Equity Podcast.